Well, hey, folks, in this episode of Profiling Evil, I'm going to sit down with veteran filmmaker Josh Zeman, the creator of The Killing Season and a brand new series. Now, I had the opportunity to participate with Josh 10 years ago. We've remained friends ever since. Now, Josh is the host of an incredible new piece of work. It's called Monster: Hunting the Long Island Serial Killer. And we're going to dig into the fresh developments that have come about in this case, the emerging forensic evidence, and the evolving portrait of accused killer Rex Heuermann. From investigative missteps to deep behavioral analysis, this conversation is going to take us beyond what I've previously covered on the case as we step into new terrain. Well, welcome back to Profiling Evil. Now, if you're new here, thanks for joining us. And please make sure you're hitting that like and subscribe button down below. Share this video with somebody who digs deeper into true crime. Now, today is a pretty special day because I've got Josh Zeman in the house. He is the filmmaker behind The Killing Season, a documentary series that I participated on some time ago. Josh is now taking on the new season of Monster: Hunting the Long Island Serial Killer. And if you've been following our channel's dive into the Long Island serial killer case, including our timeline reconstructions, you can find those at profilingevil.com in the story maps. If you've been following the behavioral breakdowns or the geographic lingo, then you're going to want to stay locked in because this is a conversation that's going to push it further than I've ever taken it before on the channel. Josh knows this story inside and out, so I want to get going. Well, let me start by welcoming my friend and my guest, Joshua Zeman. Josh is a leading voice in documentary filmmaking. He's known for his critically acclaimed true crime and investigative story capability. His 2009 film Cropsy is regarded as one of the most influential true crime documentaries of all time, blending horror with real-life mystery. Josh has also directed The Killing Season. Josh also directed The Killing Season, a docuseries that focused on the Gilgo Beach murders. We also talked about the series of murders happening down in the Albuquerque, New Mexico area. He also has done Murder Mountain, a deep dive into the dark side of the marijuana industry. And I don't want to leave out his documentary, The Loneliest Well. It was produced by Leonardo DiCaprio, earned multiple Critics' Choice Awards, and it was called a modern-day Moby Dick by the LA Times. Josh Zeman is a rock star in my book, but most importantly, he's my friend. So I want to welcome Josh Zeman. Well, Josh, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me again.
Well, it's been so fun to keep track of you over the years. I mean, we go back to like 2015 or so when we were filming and recording parts of The Killing Season, which you and Rachel did together. And what a blast for Greg and me to be a part of that. It was really interesting. In fact, I go back and I think about even coming up with some of the wild ideas like using ground penetrating radar when we were out on the West Mesa Desert and how that kind of unfolded without any of us planning. We just happened to stumble across the people that could do that. I want to start with a kind of a level set on the Long Island serial killer case. As of today, the suspect, Rex Heuermann, has been charged with the murders of Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, Amber Costello, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Jessica Taylor, and Sandra Castillo. Now, also Valerie Mack, and I don't want to leave any out. I hope I haven't left any out. Heuermann has pleaded not guilty to all counts, and in January of 2026, he will have an actual trial date that'll be set after some hearings that need to occur first. Now, the case is commonly known as the Long Island serial killer case. Some refer to it as LISK. Others, Gilgo Beach. but it came into public view in December of 2010 during the search for a missing woman. Now, that search led investigators to a chilling discovery of human remains along the Ocean Parkway near Gilgo Beach. I've walked that beach, I've walked that area over and again. Now, as time passed, additional remains were located in the same general corridor, turning what became a missing persons investigation into one of the most disturbing serial murder crimes in modern American history. Now, you can get a whole lot more information on the Long Island serial killer case by visiting and kind of exploring my story map at profilingevil.com. But here's the common thread in these cases. Most of the victims were young women who advertised escort services. Several were contacted through burner phones, and investigators later identified patterns in the communications, the disposal locations, and the timing of all of these events, which suggested planning, familiarity of the area, and a level of operational comfort. Now, Ocean Parkway is an isolated, dark area. It runs parallel to the shoreline and it offers quick access and minimal witnesses. There are few eyes that are going on in the brush there. For years, the case was marked by frustration. Despite those early recoveries, the progress stalled. There were jurisdictional tensions, leadership turnovers, limited forensic tools, and there were investigative missteps that slowed the momentum. And as the families waited, the leads went cold, and the public's confidence began to erode. But all of that changed dramatically in July of 2023 when Rex Heuermann was identified as the killer and arrested. Now, this is all alleged. The investigators say that the breakthroughs came because of advances in forensic genealogy, in the phone data analysis, and a renewed review of historical evidence, along with, of course, a piece of unfinished pizza in a trash can in Manhattan. Now, according to prosecutors, DNA has linked Heuermann to the murders. At its core, the Long Island serial case is not just about one suspect, though. It's about the victims whose lives mattered, families who waited years for answers, and a system that is now attempting to deliver justice. So, with all that, I want to jump into my conversation with Josh Zeman. But we're kind of coming full circle because after all those years passing, I continued to watch Long Island. I know you do because you live in that neck of the woods. What brought you back to the Long Island serial killer story and the creation of Monster?
Well, obviously, Rex Heuermann, being the alleged perpetrator, being caught, that was definitely huge. When that happened, we immediately started to go back and look at everything that we shot. We had done, I think we shot for like 230 days on that case, and so we started to go through all of our old interviews, and we found so much. We found we were far closer, I think, than we had ever kind of realized. And it's strange to go and interview all these people and then have it be so many years later and go back. I'm sure you've experienced that as an investigator.
Well, you know, you're absolutely right. In fact, I even think back to that early map when you were originally doing the killing season and we were trying to theorize whether it's possible the West Mesa cases could have been tied to the Long Island serial killer cases. I created maps way back then. I never got rid of them after our film. I kept working on them and tweaking them and revisiting them. And you're right, but there's this really weird phenomenon that happens for investigators, and I wonder if it's the same for investigative journalists like you, where when we finally get the chance to interview the predator or to see him face to face, we kind of walk away with a much different idea of them from the monster we created in your mind. What are your thoughts as you went through that process personally? Because you actually went into the courtroom with with Rex Heuermann.
Yeah, it is very interesting. And even when you cover cases like Son of Sam, Berkowitz. That was one of the first where people like, oh my God, he didn't look like the individual that had eluded the NYPD for a year and had done all these crimes, and he ends up looking like this kind of like schlub. Like that's what everybody that was the quote that he looked like. Never looked like the guy I thought. So I kind of knew that going in that their perpetrators don't usually look like you think. When I saw Rex, I was like, I can't believe this is him. First of all, he just didn't look like the sophisticated killer that had eluded Suffolk County PD and even the FBI for so long. He looked kind of older and oafish, if you will, like Shrek. Everybody's, and he didn't look like he could move that fast. He didn't look like he was that aware. And the oafishness was kind of very interesting and very part of it. And he was so big. That's the whole thing. Rex is like 6'5", 300 pounds. And so sometimes you get this idea of, you think that this somebody who is eluding police is kind of, like stays in the shadows and things like that. But this was a huge guy, and he was not in the shadows. He was so visible.
Did you find he was maybe larger than you even anticipated when you walked in and actually saw him physically there?
I mean, he was huge. He towered over everybody. And so when he's that big, you wonder, like, how did this guy not stick out? Whether it was dealing with these victims, sex workers, of course, how did he not stick out in and be somebody that, there's this huge guy who was around? And so that was so interesting for me, how big he was.
The other thing that I think is kind of interesting that you talked about, and we've had the chance to talk about this so many times. I mean, but every time I talk to you, I feel like I'm exploring new territory. But you talked about the fact that he doesn't fit what we envision. We often hear, and throughout the course of studying serial killers, I've looked at the response of neighbors and family members and others, and in many cases, they're saying, "Oh, that he was the greatest neighbor on the planet. Brought me chicken soup when I felt bad, and would always give me a jump start in the winter when my car battery was dead. I just never expected this." But there was a little different twist with his relationship with his neighbors. What were your thoughts around that?
I mean, they definitely came out and said, well, he was the weird guy. He was the guy that you didn't speak to. I mean, there was the fact that he didn't interact with his neighbors very well. There was also the fact that his house was really decrepit. The whole rest of the neighborhood was kind of well maintained, well manicured. His house was not manicured. It was kind of falling down, which was interesting considering the fact that he's an architect. So there was a lot of suspicion already around him. I've interviewed a fair number of, well, there's not that many, but I've interviewed one or two people who knew him. And the house was always an issue. Like when he was a child, people didn't go over to the house. And I guess that transferred over to when he was an adult. He was definitely very closed off. And we had wondered, now knowing who Rex is, and he had been frequenting sex workers for a very long time, paying for them. And so did he use a lot of that money that would have gone into, like, for example, kind of upgrading the house? Was that money being spent on sex workers and things like that? It was just very strange.
you know, when I went out and I walked the neighborhood several months after he had been arrested, and of course the crime scene had been cleaned up, and all of the tape had disappeared. Although the disheveled look of the home and the creepiness of the home, and as I came in off of the highway, and you kind of cross over a little road that's kind of a frontage road into the neighborhood. As I drove in, I'm thinking, I don't know how I'm going to find this house, until I turned the corner, and there it was. It was the creepy house in the neighborhood.
Yeah, sometimes that fits, right? The house fit to our preconceived notions. I don't know if the individual did, or then again, to some people, speaking to Mark Safrick, FBI profiler, he was like, oh yeah, he was almost a combination of Ed Kemper, because Ed Kemper was so huge, and Rifkin, who was another Long Islander, as you know, who also killed sex workers and kind of was a little bit of an introvert and didn't function in the community as well. So it was interesting. He fit two of those patterns, I guess.
The level of reporting that you ended up doing as you dug into Monster and continued this series, not only with the historical knowledge that you've had, because you've been walking that area for a, more than a decade, I would assume, but
Mm-hmm.
what new angles or leads are you finding and that you have found that you had access to this time around that wasn't available back in 2015, 16?
Well, I think it's always interesting, I guess, from an investigative journalist standpoint, to do these interviews and to realize, was I close? Right? I think that's part of ego, right? You want to find the guy and you're like, was I close? How close did I get? And it's a very humbling experience sometimes, as you might understand. For example, one of the first things that Rachel and I ever did was we filmed um, the web sleuth community, because this web sleuth community was just emerging at the time. And we looked at a whole bunch of interesting theories that had come up. And literally, the first interview we did in 2013, somebody's like, "Oh, I believe this individual is a duck hunter." And at the time, Ocean Parkway, we didn't know as much about Ocean Parkway as we do now. And we're like, duck hunter, that's ridiculous. Like Elmer Fudd, like this makes no sense. And lo and behold, he was a duck hunter. So like right in the beginning, somebody was there. Then one of the biggest things was interviewing a guy named Dave Shaw. And as you know, we've learned as investigative journalists, you either do two things when you're investigating serial murder, at least from my standpoint, which is you either go back to the first crime, right? Because a lot of clues are revealed in the first murder, because that's where the perpetrator theoretically makes his first mistakes that he then learns from, or the last, right? Because there's another mistake there. So we went to the last, and that being Amberlynn Costello was the last victim. And we interviewed her roommate at the time, Dave Schaller, and Dave Schaller told us these really interesting things. He said, "Oh, I told the police it could be either of three individuals." And he kind of described these three individuals. And one of the individuals that he describes was this monster, an ogre of a man, he said, Frankenstein, 6'5", 300 pounds. He had come into the house previously and had gotten into a fight because maybe, we don't quite know, but the boyfriend had been doing this, the boyfriend scam, where I guess, the individual, the John, comes in and he busts through the door saying, "What's going on here?" And they rouse the guy and they send him out, but keep the money, right? Just so she doesn't have to have sex with him, but they keep the money. So apparently they had, done this kind of con to Rex. They had gotten into a fight, a big fist fight. And Dave's a big guy. He's an MMA fighter, and they had fought out on the lawn. And then they saw, allegedly, Rex take off in his Chevy Avalanche. So he mentioned this fight with this guy who was so huge and going and leaving in this Chevy Avalanche. And he said that he told this to the Suffolk County Police Department detectives who came by. And it was interesting because we're like, oh, well, describe these three individuals, but this one individual that he had mentioned. And to be honest, we didn't pursue that clue because we assumed that the Suffolk County Police Department had pursued that clue. So, and now we know that in fact it was that, and as well, that police report that indicated these three individuals had theoretically been kind of put in a file and lost for 10 years or so. And only when they went back through the investigation, started, interestingly enough, digitizing all the files so they could be, I guess, scanned through properly, did they find this clue and then go back and then do another search. They had done a lawman search. I guess you know what that is. This where you can look through types of vehicles and things like that. They didn't find the vehicle the first time, but there's some question about really what happened back then. But finding out that piece of information, that this individual had told the police this clue, and he had told us this clue, and us asking about him, and then finding out, oh my God, that really was Rex Heuermann. It was crazy.
I found that series of time kind of interesting, and I've wanted to ask the question one day, hopefully, to the investigators, but maybe you can answer this from what you've uncovered. Did you see a behavioral change in the alleged Heuermann as the suspect when that fight occurred and that tune-up kind of happened? Because that is so far outside of what his fantasy would have been at that moment that it would have been really disruptive from a behavioral standpoint. And I wonder how that impacted what he was doing, if there was a cool down period or if that further aggravated him.
Well, we now know, speaking from numerous individuals, again, allegedly, if it is Rex, that he had been bullied as a child. But it was interesting because we learned he wasn't necessarily, yes, he had been bullied by boys, but it seemed like the bullying from the high school girls was really what set him off. He had also, asked many of them out, and they kind of laughed in his face. And so then his next behavior as a child is like stealing things from girls' lockers. So there was this kind of interaction with these girls, and I think that precipitated into revenge fantasies. So that was an important clue when we learned that Amber and Dave theoretically had pulled a con on him. The idea that he had been tricked by, a girl, even a sex worker, maybe that's what set him off. That is what changed his mind from a regular interaction to then going back later and snatching her. Because the offender, why would an offender show his face? This guy who had taken so many precautions, why would he show his face, get into a fight, everybody saw him, and then go back and snatch this girl 2 weeks later? It doesn't make any sense.
I found it interesting also as I kind of looked at the case from that perspective, is the possibility that even doing something as simple as stealing things from the girls' lockers in high school is a way to exhibit control, to say, look, you aren't safe. I'm really able to watch what's going on. That was always just really interesting. Now, there have been some real powerful major developments in the case recently with the judge's decision to allow the advanced DNA evidence in. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, help people understand what that's all about and why
Sure.
it's so dang important?
Sure. I mean, you're talking about genome sequencing. So basically, beforehand, and you know more about this than I do. I'm just even learning about this DNA, but basically, there was a lot of degraded DNA. But now, with this new type of genome sequencing through Othram, we can take a hair and basically find so much more information about a hair. And so it was a new type, quote unquote, of DNA analysis. It hadn't been used in court before, at least in New York State. And so the judge ruling that this DNA evidence was admissible was really important. And I think this changes precedent for a lot of different cold cases across the country. I mean, what did you guys see on being where you guys are? How are you guys looking at that New York case?
Well, I think very much in line with what you just said. I think that's what's so exciting about this. Probably will also lead to a lot of challenges post conviction if a conviction comes, and so it'll be neat to see how it's tested through the courts in regard to that. As we were talking about some of those control issues, I also had a thought back on the West Mesa case where we had theorized that the predator who was responsible for killing at least the 13 women that we're aware of out there, that predator selected a location where he could, in effect, see and revisit the dumping grounds where
Mhm.
those victims were left. And in your show, we actually charted that out, if I remember right, where we talked about how visually that was available. I did the same thing with Heuermann in looking at the beach line from his home, and there's just a small elevation change enough that you would have to be on his rooftop, I think, to even see ocean water. But I found it so interesting, the proximity to the disposal sites or the dumping grounds to Rex Heuermann's home and what we discovered in Mesa.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm also learning that sexual sadists have a different kind of um, relationship, I guess, to the dumping ground. They're not going back necessarily to interact with the body in some, like you would see in some other cases. They're more of a kind of controlled drive-by scenario. I mean, is that something that you guys have figured out? I don't know, but I was told that it's more of a drive-by. They like the control of driving by.
Well, it takes me back to the classroom setting we had in Albuquerque when Greg was kind of trying to write some things on on the board, the grease board, if you remember that. And when we were talking about the fact that it's more about vicariously going back and rolling in the dirt than necessarily going back and touching and feeling, and probably not much different from a legitimate perspective of I look behind me, I've got things that remind me of things. I'm looking at your imagery and films that you've worked on and projects,
Yeah,
and those become your vicarious rolling in the dirt
yeah.
location. And so I think it's exactly that. What a great way to go for a Sunday afternoon drive and relive all those emotional experiences.
Well, yeah, I mean that it's creepy. Well, what's also interesting is that we were also trying to figure out. I even think we discussed this where we were trying to figure out whether or not he had allegedly placed some torsos kind of out in the open. And we were like, why are these torsos out in the open? Is this some kind of attempt to shock people once they found the torso? But now learning what we know, it may be more of it's they're out in the open so he could see them as he drives by, and that was another thing. We One of the victims, Jessica Taylor, her torso had been laid out on, had been kind of presented out on a road that people went down to walk their dog or kids to hang out, and we were like, well, why didn't he put the torso in the brush, which was just right there? But then when we learned about Rex and allegedly, if it is true, he went to he often went on a Sunday to a marksman a shooting range that was just 2 miles away, and so we realized if whenever he went to the shooting range, he could drive in his car and see that spot that he had put that victim. So yeah, this kind of revisiting just by driving, just by seeing. It's so interesting.
I think that really is important. And I remember even last year, I went and visited the family of a Suffolk County police officer who was killed many years ago. And while I was there, I made sure I took time to drive up the beach, and I drove actually a loop that I've theorized that Heuermann would possibly take in order to do that. But this idea that you could actually go and revisit and think about for these predators how exciting it is for them, not only just to go and drive by, but if they are trying to position a victim in a place where they would be discovered, how that's all part of this game for them, that it really gets their motor running and gives them all this power and control, and causes them to go back and keep this story alive in the news and other places.
Yeah, you learn how much ego is really part of it, which is very strange and messed up. That ego drives so much of their behavior.
Yeah. So Josh, without giving away any big reveals, tell me about the moments in Monster that really shifted your perspective or caught you by surprise.
Well, there was definitely learning how close we came. That was number one. I think number two, everybody tries to play Monday morning quarterback, right? Especially the journalist or especially the public, and so going back in and finding out why it took so long to apprehend Rex if it is in fact Rex. One of the things that was totally shocking was learning, and I think we spoke about this, learning how he tried to use books like Mindhunter to not get caught. Whether they're forensic countermeasures or what have you, that idea that he had gone so far to not get caught, trying to learn. And we had seen other cases where there's, dumping bodies across jurisdictions. That was very interesting. He had tried to do the same thing, dismemberment as a forensic countermeasure, utilitarian reasons. So, and then this planning document was just unbelievable. I've never seen anything like this. It literally kind of knocked me off my feet. The fact that he had created these planning documents and had them on his computer, and it basically outlined everything. It was so shocking.
Did you find, as you've studied this, specific evolution points throughout the series of these where the predator appears to have learned and evolved?
Yeah, well, the dismemberment for sure. You have a victim, Sandra Castilla, 1993. She's found out in the woods, and then after that, it's interesting because it's 1993. Then they find in his house a copy of Mindhunter, paperback version, 1996. 1997, he dismembers his first victim, theoretically Karen Vergata. Her legs are found on Fire Island. The rest of her is found on Ocean Parkway. And then this kind of pattern of dismemberment over, you've got Valerie Mack, you've got Jessica Taylor. And then, weirdly enough, he stops dismembering with what's known as the Gilgo Four. So no dismemberment, then reading a book, dismembering, and then going back to no dismemberment. The question many people ask is, why was there no dismemberment on the last set of victims? And it seems maybe he had gotten away with it and just figured he didn't have to do that anymore. And that was an interesting thing. So we've got that. Tattoos. So interesting. Again, another thing that was brought up in the book. We've got some early victims that the tattoos had not been obscured, which helped identify them. And then so you see him start to try and eliminate the tattoos, whether it's cutting off body parts that have tattoos on them and discarding them, whether it's trying to obscure the body tattoos, as he did in Jessica Taylor. So that was very interesting as well. Then you see in his planning document, I mean, the creepiest part of his planning document is like, get more sleep for more playtime, like next time. And you're just like, oh my God, or use a stronger crossbar next time. And so you see the learning and the evolution, both in his behaviors and in things that he's written down.
You know, folks, when I cover cases like the Long Island serial killer, I don't rely on hindsight. I prefer to go back to the reporting that happened in real time. That's why I lean upon newspapers.com to see what the investigators, the neighbors, the journalists are actually seeing unfold in real time. There's no AI summaries, no rewrites. It's the real record preserved in real newspapers. So if you'd like to give newspapers.com a try, I've arranged for a 20% discount, and you can get the code in the link below. I think back to the late 50s, early 60s, when we really discovered the value of fingerprints and how that changed the world of investigations, because now people started wearing gloves. There's always going to be this yin and yang discussion about whether the true crime genre that we're involved in is hurting or helping. What are your thoughts as one who provides content?
I mean, listen, that is a great question. I ask that reflectively on everybody that I speak to. Are we helping or hurting? I think you have to assume that we're helping, because we're looking, you and I are both looking at cases that need help. Um, there will always be offenders who are trying to not get caught, and using those, the information, watching documentaries, reading books, like that is always going to happen. Leopold and Loeb did that. So despite, it's always going to happen. So you can't get around that fact. I don't think anything. I try and when I create content, I try and always tailored to be like, see, they didn't get away with it. See, you're always going to get caught. So I would try and put a little bit there. Like, I also try and say that, for example, when we're talking about the alleged list, whether it's Rex or not, we were talking about how in doing these behaviors, it really shows how weak they are. And so almost like, if you have this idea to do this, you shouldn't, because it'll only make people think how weak you really are. So, it's a tough one, but I think hopefully we do more help than we do good, and I think you always have to think about that.
There was a serial child predator who injured more than 500 children that I spent a lot of hours in the prison system interviewing. His name was Oliver Garish, and I remember at one point I was not able to get him to talk to me, but I wanted him to talk to me as part of this process that we were doing, where we were trying to help investigators understand criminal behavior and motivation. And the secret to always being successful in an interview, I found, was motivation. And here's what I discovered after looking at him sitting in the prison system, had gone through his appeals, was now there for the rest of his life. The one thing that he really craved, but he couldn't get inside the prison, was Orange Crush soda. And I remember walking in to our interview. He was locked down in the cell, and I walked in with a carton of Orange Crush soda, and I set it on the counter next to me. And I sat back and I started asking him questions. And what do you think? Do you think he was looking at me or he could not take his eyes off it? And that's actually what got him talking and had him to the point that he then, and I actually show some old video of me using him in training with police officers on my on Profiling Evil. I play some of the old video of him explaining how he would select child victims and how he would commit his crimes and get away with it. But it all boiled down to the Orange Crush soda. So the secret is always learning what the Orange Crush is that they're after. And I'm like you, predators are going to continue to evolve. They're going to, because they want to be successful, they're going to continue to study and get better at what they do. But the blessing that we have in investigations and in what you do is that reality is never as cool as fantasy. And so they're going to have to keep repeating and fixing. And in those fixes is where we find the mistakes.
I'll be honest with you. One of the things that I try and point out, and maybe investigators know this, they're like, duh. but like, I'm always, one of the things that frustrates me the most is jurisdictional issues. Going in and speaking, for example, to, and learning about the Highway Serial Killer Initiative, and how before that there were all these jurisdictional issues that allowed certain offenders, especially driving trucks, to pick up a victim in one state and drop them in another. And, this was something that the alleged Rex Heuermann did as well, putting one body part in Suffolk County and another in Nassau County, and whether or not that was going to be a thing. So that's something that I definitely try and bring up, not to help the offender, but to, push and help law enforcement. Hey guys, please, try and work together. I mean, in your mind, does it happen as much as it did before?
Oh yeah, I still think that it is a constant battle, and we used to call it, and it's something that actually Cooper taught me, was that he called it the 3 C's: cooperation, communication, and coordination. That law enforcement is different than any place in the world. I think probably one of the last times I physically saw you, we were in a foreign country at an airport, if I remember right. And I don't even remember what country it was, but I spent much of my career traveling throughout the world, meeting with law enforcement in countries around the world. most countries have a centralized law enforcement agency. The United States, 18,000 different police chiefs deciding what's going to happen in their jurisdiction. That leads to nothing but communication breakdowns. And while technology has brought us a long way, we still have that jurisdictional infighting. But in Suffolk County, if you look historically at what was going on during those investigations, there was also fighting going on inside.
I mean, I think Suffolk County is a very specific and unique case because you had an extra level of corruption there that, and that was one of the other things we learned in Monster. We thought it was a certain type of corruption, that it was about, one bad guy or two bad guys, bad actors that kind of ruined the whole pool. And it was about, the fact that they had been frequenting sex workers or what have you. What we learned in going further into the investigation is that there might be a situation where literally a police chief or a pre-police chief and a district attorney were trying to take over the police department. And in the politics of trying to take over the police department, they said maybe to certain investigators, hey, if you have a lead, just wait till I get there and then we can investigate that lead. Don't give it to the current guy. We don't know if that is exactly the case, but it seems to be that basically certain detectives were not passing that information along to their higher ups, and that may be one reason why somebody said didn't push for somebody to investigate that avalanche lead. We don't know 100% sure, but that's what we think. And so learning about the different types of corruptions or foibles that can happen in an investigation is really interesting. It's almost never what you really think it is in terms of corruption.
You've lived this case for a long time. Do you dare take and step out on a little bit of ice here and tell me if you think we've got all the victims, if Heuermann is the true serial killer of Long Island? Is it a serial killer case or is it a serial killer location?
Great question. Number one, have we gotten all of the alleged Rex Heuermann's victims? I don't think so. I think there's one victim, absolutely for sure, that has not been. I'm sure it's been considered. This being Carmen Vargas, an individual woman who was found in 1989. So this would be 4 years previous to the known victim, Sandra Castilla, that we know. We all talked about Carmen Vargas. We're waiting to see if we get some information about Carmen Vargas. Originally, they thought maybe it was Joel Rifkin for Carmen Vargas, but now, again, hopefully we will be getting some information on that. So definitely some early victims, one for sure. The question I think that everybody has is, what about the later victims? Anybody after Amber Lynn Costello? It was interesting to, again, bring up Mark's name. He had done a big research project on serial sexual sadists who are over 50. And they kind of really stopped that behavior after 50. And so I thought that was very interesting because everybody's like, oh my God, where does it end? But I actually concur with Mark's assessment that chances are he didn't do too many other, there's no other victims, but who knows? But earlier for sure. Your other question, which brings back to a very interesting point, which you had spoken to me about. And I was like, I don't know. I didn't quite believe it. But you said about Peaches, Tanya Denise Jackson. You were like, I don't know if she's connected. Do you remember that?
I do remember that.
Do you want to take a victory lap?
No, but please, I want to hear what you remember.
You said, I don't know if she's connected to this case. I guess because she was Black and Rex was white, or there were a couple of different issues at hand. And you said, "Oh, I don't believe she's connected to this case." I was like, "What are you talking about?" But recently, Nassau County Police arrested the father of her child, a guy by the name of Andrew Dykes, for her murder. Now, this is a really interesting wrinkle in this case because for so long, everybody had assumed that the alleged Rex Heuermann was responsible for Tanya and the baby Tatiana. Now maybe it's not true. Personally, I have real hard. I am conflicted because I say that lightly, conflicted. If you heard me, I rant about it actually, because the way that the bodies were found on Gilgo Beach, one victim was found just 2.5 miles from another dismembered victim within a 2-year period, 1996 to 1997, and then if you believe or logic would dictate for Nassau County, if Andrew Dykes killed the mother, he would have had to kill his own daughter, Tatiana. And Tatiana is found only 212 feet from Valerie Mack. This is like a 50-mile stretch of road. So you have to ask yourself, is that coincidence? It's not just one coincidence in terms of a dump. It's two, because you have two victims going next to two other alleged victims of Rex Heuermann. So I'm very conflicted about this.
And I always go back to this is why I think geography is so stinking important. Is I love to look at the aerial maps of then and now, and to look at the places that just make sense, that you might be able to pull over and throw a body over your shoulder and carry it into the brush. And there are so many places along that road that are barricaded by development, that have only an entry for people living in the neighborhood or other kinds of things, that it creates natural kinds of barriers as well. But every once in a while, I guess I get lucky.
Well, I would love for you to please take a look again, because this is driving me nuts about this thing. From a statistical standpoint, yes, one of the things is there's a turnaround, right? There's a turnaround on Ocean Parkway. And so you've got two individuals dumped again. Valerie Mack being a theoretical victim of Rex Heuermann, only 212 feet away from the baby doe. This would be Tatiana. Again, two different offenders dumping two individuals within 212 feet of each other on what is a complete 10-mile stretch of mostly undeveloped land, just scrub brush. However, there is a turnaround right there. So that could be a reason why they could be found together, a logical reason, but the jury is still out.
Well, maybe there'll be a confession at the end of the day. In 10 more years, we'll get the real story behind that. As you dug deeper for Monster, was there anything that really changed your opinion of this predator, their motivation, their processes?
I mean, first, when I first saw him, I was like, oh my God, that's him. But then and again, Suffolk County presented many different individuals over the years, individuals that did make sense and individuals that didn't make sense. But they had presented both of them with the same amount of, kind of intensity. So the question was like, is this really the guy? Because we'd seen so many different people. Then we found out he was an architect who worked in New York City, in Manhattan, right in Midtown Manhattan, and that made sense with some of the aspects of the crime. Then we learned that he was from Massapequa, and then there were other things that made sense. So first we went from, I don't know, prove it, because of how they botched the case previously. Then it was like, this makes sense, and then it was learning about all these things. But this was an individual who had taken all these theoretical precautions and burner phones and washing cavities and doing all these things, yet at the same time the mistakes were so dumb, if you will. Going back to this victim where he had been seen at the location previously, the fact that his wife's or daughter's hair had been almost found on every single victim. It's like he had taken all these precautions, but then he took a roll of tape and he like dragged it across the house and then like wrapped all the victims. Like there was hair from his family on every single victim.
Yeah, that one still kind of boggles my mind as well. to be so structured and so methodical, and yet those are the things that hopefully will help solve the case. I think there are going to be a lot of people that, well, hopefully are already following Monster, but will now follow Monster. How are they going to find it? And how are they going to track this? And what do you want them to really pay close attention to as they listen?
Well, first, Monster you can get on iHeart. You can get it on Spotify. The good news is that all the episodes now are free. um, I think here's the point: serial killer cases, especially ones like these, are extremely complicated, and we always say this: they don't get solved in a half an hour, of course, but there's so many issues at hand, and whether it's the victims, and it's so easy to just call them sex workers and not really understand who they are. So one is understanding who these victims are. The other one is realizing that there's so many issues that go into a case like this. This is about police corruption. This is about good old fashioned detective work, gumshoeing. This is really tests the mettle of behavioral analysis to the nth degree. That's what is so interesting to me. We still don't even know. This is, you know, this is about how you had an offender that theoretically was changing his MO, whether his signature, I don't know, but changing his MO, and the police department reacting. There was an original DA who was, saying this was four different serial killers. So this is a serial killer case that's so complicated, but is so important. I mean, it feels a little like some of those Southside Slayer, the LA story, where, it turned out to be the Grim Sleeper and other victims. Like, there's so much involved in this case. So I think all these things are really important, but this case isn't over either. It is still evolving. We are still learning things every day. Learning about Peaches, and someone else being arrested for that case was crazy. That just happened 3 weeks ago.
That is, well, folks, I really hope you will make sure that you subscribe to Monster and follow this case. A couple of things that keep popping up in my mind regarding the case, Josh, is if I'm remembering correctly, there was some clothing or a glove or something found on Jones Beach. What's the nexus here?
So we now know that the alleged Rex Heuermann, as a young adult, high school age and older, had worked on Jones Beach. He had been hired to like go around on an ATV at night to make sure people weren't staying on the beach. So we know he worked at Jones Beach. What's of course important here is that many of the victims were found along this Ocean Parkway and found right in front of Jones Beach. You also very recently, it had been uncovered while they were doing some construction at one of the bathhouses. They found buried some girl's clothing and a bloody glove. And it seemed like the girl's clothing had been like ripped, like buttons were missing and things like that. So we don't know whether or not, could it be that this clothing was the clothing that theoretically Rex Heuermann allegedly had taken from girls' lockers? Could it be victims' clothing of other victims? Could it be clothing of the victims? We don't know what, but it's a very interesting clue, and the fact that we're still uncovering these little details is super fascinating.
Yeah, the canvas bags and tying them, trying to tie them to a nursery and all of that. Do you remember kind of the stories around that and what the
Talking about the
significance?
burlap sacks.
That yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah,
Yeah. Oh, well, the burlap sacks was fascinating. Very early in the investigation, the police had kind of revealed a clue, or somebody had leaked a clue that the victims that were found wrapped in burlap. One of the police chief had told us that there was something written or something on the outside of the burlap. Like, that was a clue that he gave us, and that sparked us to run around Suffolk County because we thought that maybe it was landscaping burlap or
yeah,
something like that. Yeah. And what we ended up finding out once Rex Heuermann was arrested, that the burlap was actually camouflage burlap. It was camo. That was the design on the outside. And it's believed that this burlap was the same burlap used in like duck hunting. It's camo for blinds, and
Yeah.
the victims had been wrapped in the Gilgo Four had been wrapped in that camo. So that's another interesting point. Definitely a clue that we sent us on a very wild goose chase.
And do you know if I know that they haven't released a lot of information, but is there any inkling that similar kinds of burlap was found anywhere at the Heuermann property or in his duck hunting collection? Or
No, there is a lot of information about his obsession with guns and his obsession with hunting. He
yeah,
had 300 guns. I think 92 of them weren't registered, but a lot of them were. And he had gone to numerous gun clubs around Long Island, participated. He had been a marksman. In fact, that was one of his high school sports that he did very well. He excelled at was marksmanship. He had gone hunting with his father, it's believed. And so that was very interesting. There's a lot of pictures of him in the water right along that Ocean Parkway. In fact, like just very weird, very close to where one of the victims' Asian doe was found. He's like sitting in the water, smiling with like these decoy ducks around him. So again, another reason why he was both so familiar with the area, but also interesting enough, another reason why he might, if a police officer, trooper, state guy pulled him over, why he would be on Ocean Parkway at 4:00 in the morning, pulled off to the side of the road. And I remember when we were searching through that brush specifically, if it was up to your chest, you couldn't see the bottom of the brush. It was so thick, you couldn't see right down at the bottom. And I think people just don't realize how difficult that is. Terrain is a thing, unless you're actually out there, you just don't realize how difficult it all is. So the
yeah,
public likes to speculate. That was another thing about Monster that I think was so interesting, whether it was Shannon Gilbert, how could this be, or whether it's those specific issues or even the larger issues about thinking there's always a conspiracy behind series of murders or murders that we don't have answers to. And I think the important thing to realize is that like sometimes not everything is a conspiracy. A lot of times the reasons why we don't have these answers are tragically mundane.
yeah, they just make sense.
It's Occam's razor. It's like, sorry, our brains have kind of been trained by TV to think about these big conspiracy cases when it's in fact not so.
That's one of the coolest parts about looking at true crime from my perspective, and we'll kind of use this as a way to wrap maybe, but I remember working with a brilliant PhD named Dr. Fred Cowie on the Unabomber case, and Fred knew Kaczynski inside and out. And I remember one day talking to him. We had just spoken at a Bureau of Justice conference about some of these behavioral characteristics. And he said, while what they do may not make sense to us, it makes perfect sense to them. And we have to just kind of remember that as we put these things together. Josh, how can people follow you?
Oh yeah, I have a YouTube channel now. I've decided to move, I guess, from long form TV to YouTube just because it's so much more immediate. Like I like
Yeah.
being able to like find something and kind of like talk about it. So I have a YouTube, which is Sinister with Josh Zeman. That's the best place to get to see everything that we're doing. We're uncovering stuff. We're interviewing people. We just interviewed Bob Kolker again, who wrote Lost Girls, a fascinating book. And so this is an active case. This is still an active investigation. The trial is going to start in September of 2026. That's a long time from now. There's still many victims that haven't been identified. So we're investigating that, and I hope people will join and kind of follow us as we go through this investigation.
And is that date in stone? Because I thought there were a couple of hearings coming up in the week or two ahead of us, and then they're going to lock it in.
Yeah, we were told by the defense attorney that it's 2026, September 2026. On the 13th of January is when the next hearing is, and this suppression hearing for two of the victims, but this is going to be a big case, and so I don't think it's going to be any sooner than September 2026.
No, if it even happens then, the
Yeah,
way
I mean,
things get continued.
yeah. Is he gonna
Well,
plea, right?
yeah, exactly. Thanks for your many years of friendship, your example. I appreciate, and I have appreciated throughout the time I've known you, your integrity in reporting these things too. So thank you,
Thanks, I
Josh.
appreciate
Thanks for
that.
taking time to be on with me today.
Of course.
Well, I want to thank Josh Zeman again, and I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Now, if you found this conversation to be valuable, please hit the like and subscribe button. Share Profiling Evil with somebody else who tracks the list case or other true crime cases. And ring that bell so you never miss a deep dive. And please send me your questions either through email at profilingevil.com or build it into a video that you send me, and I'll try to play that the next time we do Feedback Friday. So thanks for your support of Profiling Evil. Make sure you're watching for us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, and TikTok. And if you're the kind of person who likes to get your true crime on the go, make sure you're subscribed to Profiling Evil's audio podcasts on your favorite podcast platform. I am so excited to announce that our audio podcasts are now hosted by our partner, Gamut Podcast Network. They are going to be dropping my newest podcast, Gardens of Evil, inside the Zion Society cult. And it drops on February 3rd as part of the American Nightmares series. So don't miss it. You can follow the link down below. And if you'd like to learn more about the behaviors that are discussed in today's episode, you can check out my newest book, Wolves in Sheep's Clothing. Now, the book was written for people like you, true crime enthusiasts who want to know a little more about the way in which predators select their victims, how they get away with their crimes, and why they keep on hunting until they get captured. If you live in the United States, I'll sign the book and I'll ship it to you for free. Otherwise, you can find Wolves in Sheep's Clothing or my book, Deceived or She Knew No Fear, through Amazon or Ingram Spark. I'm Mike King, and this is Profiling Evil. We'll see you soon at the next crime scene.